Good. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to season 6, episode 11 of our leadership series. Today's topic is assessing and mitigating your cyber risk. I'd like to welcome back Jeff Rembaum. Of course, you know him, partner Kay Bender Rembaum. Jeff, we have a couple of new guests today. Welcome to Kevin Davis, president of Worldwide Insurance Services of DE Inc., and Sean Kalinich, chief information security officer at Kinetics Solutions. Of course, Jeff, we know you. Kevin, can we start by telling us a little bit about yourself and Worldwide Insurance Services?
Sure. Okay. It's Kevin Davis Insurance Service. We're part of Worldwide, which is also part of Amwin. But I've been in insurance for about 40 years, exclusively handling community associations. So my first community association I ever saw was in 1981, handling directors and officers liability insurance. And since that time, we insure about 40,000 community associations across the country, most of them in Florida. But lately, I've been doing a lot of talking about cyber and cyber exposures to community associations. And I look forward to continuing and helping out this conversation today.
Kevin, thank you very much. Just so you know, we try not to put specific labels on years as we age. So I've been in the business a long time is a sufficient summary of your experience. So for future reference,
I get it.
Sean, how about you? Your turn, Sean. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Sean Kalinich, and I've been in the industry for a very long time, going back, and I've sort of covered the gamut of different types of roles and responsibilities in information security, IT operations, cybersecurity, and so on. Actually did development for a little while, and now, of course, I perform more of a strategic and logistical function at Kinetic Solution as their Chief Information Security Officer, as well as a fractional resource for other organizations that Kinetic supports.
Fantastic. Well, Sean and Kevin, we're going to pick your brains this afternoon, so really appreciate you joining us. Before we get going, I just want to remind everyone that our panel is here today to give you their thoughts on the agenda items today and not specific advice for your association. Thank you for those who sent in questions with your registration. I'm confident that the webinar today will address most of the things related to our topic of cybersecurity. If you sent in a question not related to cybersecurity, it is unlikely we'll get to it today, but we certainly will consider that as we put together our next webinar. I did want to let you know that you can, as Julie said, continue to chat in your questions, and I'll try and work those into the discussion this afternoon. And then finally, the last time we met, we had a very condo-centric topic, specifically the new legislation, SB 913. So we did promise we'd have a topic today that applied to all associations, and the topic of cybersecurity certainly applies to everybody. So I think we've checked that box. We are going to use the polling feature today. Julie, I'd like to ask our first question just to confirm who's in the audience. And while you're doing that, I'll just take you through the agenda. Today, we're going to start off, before we get deeply into cybersecurity, we're going to start off with, there are some legislations, upcoming deadlines from the legislation that just passed, so we're going to review that with you. We're going to review the legal requirement to carry insurance, general insurance, basically. Then we're going to get into the meat of our discussion today, which is cybersecurity and understanding that risk. And Sean is going to take us through some specific examples of cyber risk. Then we're going to talk about insurance against that risk if it ever happens. We're going to count heavily on Kevin for that part of the discussion, and then answer any questions that you may have. So, Julie, can you please post the results of the poll questions? So let's see who we have today. Boy, about half and half. It couldn't be more closer to half and half. 50% condo, 50% HOA. So that's fantastic. And again, this does apply to everybody. So it's a perfect audience. Okay, let's jump right in, Jeff. For you, SB 913 passed in July, I guess, in the legislative session that ended, whenever it ended in May, I guess. And there are some deadlines that are upcoming still. So can you walk us through those?
Sure will. Before I do, thank you everybody for joining us. It's funny, as I look at the roll today and I compare the people that are here versus the number of people, that are here today versus the number of people that were here when we talked about the last bill in our last session. And the numbers were much higher before, yet this is something that can really, if you're caught off guard, cost your condominium homeowner association quite a bit of money if you're not prepared with cybersecurity. So I think the timing of this topic is very appropriate. Craig, to your point before about not mentioning how long we've been doing things, I will just say that your biblical review of how we look at these things is always relevant and important, but biblical being the key word there. And Kevin Davis, it's always nice to see your younger brother on the picture that I saw of you just a few moments ago. Nice picture. Sean, you'll escape unharmed on this one. All right. Hi, everybody. So K. Bender Rambam, you know, we're a community association law firm. That's all we do, servicing condos, HOAs, co-ops around the state of Florida. That said, in this year's legislation for condominium associations, there's a new requirement as of, you need to do this by October 1st, on or before October 1st. All condominium associations must create and maintain an online account with the division. Now, it is very easy to do this. You could even do a DBPR search. I'm sure you can go to Castle's website. I know you can go to the kbrlegal.com. And you'll find the link to the division website there for the registration. Very easy to do. You're going to provide the name of the association, the physical address, mailing address, some email addresses, other information such as the number of buildings for each building in the number of buildings in the association itself, number of stories, units, certain things about the construction, certain things about the assessment regime. And then I understand they have overreached and are requiring additional information that is not set out in the legislation. If you're astute enough to figure out the difference between the two, legally, you're only obligated to answer what the legislation requires. But if you want to provide that additional information, that would be optional at your leisure. If you have any questions about what you must and need not provide, reach out to your association's lawyer. They can provide that detailed information, though I see no real harm in providing the extra information the division is requesting. Won't take you but about 15 minutes, probably all in, to answer the questions.
Great, Jeff. Thank you very much. And that's for condos only at this point, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do understand they're asking for a bunch of additional information, including banking. So I think it is a good idea to get some guidance on this from your association attorney.
Sure.
No one knows what they're going to do with all that information, but that's to be determined at a later date, I suppose.
I hope they use it to make better legislation in the future. And I think that's the idea, is to get their arms around the structural integrity reserves and really the real world situation out there to get back to the legislature.
That'd be fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the requirement to carry insurance. Jeff, I know there's some requirement in the statute. So first for condos, can you talk us through the real requirement to carry an insurance program, have an insurance program? How about that? And then maybe move on to HOAs.
Sure, I sure will. Specifically for you legal gurus out there, we're going to look at section 718.111, subsection 11. One of the most important and one of the most confusing statutes in the Condominium Act. You have to read it several times to really figure it out. But if you look at the various provisions in a slightly different order, it will make a whole lot more sense. So I'm only going to read a few particular, Craig, to answer your particular question. So the first part we're going to look at is actually in subsection C. An association controlled by unit owners operating as a residential condominium association shall use its best efforts to obtain and maintain adequate property insurance to protect the association, property, the association itself, the common elements, the condominium property that must be insured by the association pursuant to this subsection. Then you have to go back to the beginning of the legislation itself to see where exactly we want to go next. And that is the very second part of the legislation. Every condominium association shall have adequate property insurance as determined under this paragraph, regardless of any requirement in the declaration of condominium for certain coverage. So if you don't opt out of 718.111.11, you are following the requirements that are set out in the legislation. And remember, we use the word best efforts. That is the highest standard available in law. It used to be reasonable business judgment, and pretty much every decision made by the board is subject to the test of time. Did you use reasonable business judgment? But when it comes to purchasing insurance for the association, you're held to that highest standard, best efforts. From there, we then go to, well, how much insurance? If we know we need to have adequate property insurance for the residential condominium, what next? The amount of adequate insurance coverage for full insurable value, replacement cost, or similar coverage may be based on the replacement cost of the property to be insured as determined by an independent insurance appraisal or update. The replacement cost must be determined at least once every 3 years. So it may be based on that standard, may be based on the replacement cost as determined by the independent insurance appraisal. But regardless, you need to have that appraisal every 3 years. Then, when you're determining the amount of adequate property insurance for your condominium, the association may consider the deductibles as determined by the legislation. And then we get into the types of insurance that, in addition to the adequate insurance for the full insurable replacement cost or similar coverage, and then there are other types of insurance as well. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but for example, fidelity coverage, right? We want to make sure you have insurance for that. Want to make sure we have coverage for the committee members and the board members and such. So those are all things to consider. But that is pretty much the basics if we had to do a primer on the condominium insurance. And remember, the association may also obtain and maintain liability for the director officer insurance for the benefit of employees. Here's one. Do we need it or not? The legislation says it's optional. But I tell you what, if I live in your building and it gets wet because of a flood and you don't have flood insurance, I would not be surprised if that board of directors were sued personally for breach of using those best efforts, especially if you're in a flood zone. But even if you're not, half of all the floods in the state occur outside the designated flood zones. We're on swampland here. Man, if you don't buy flood insurance and you get flooded, oh boy, that could be a real problem, something for you to discuss, not the subject of today's webinar. So I'll get off my high horse about flood insurance and bring us back to cybersecurity. HOAs, go read your declaration, figure out what you need to insure. The requirements for your insurance will be set out in your homeowner association declaration of covenants. Again, reasonable business judgment is to be executed there when purchasing insurance in the HOA. Condos, I'm not going to go through it again. I've already said it. You can replay. I'm sure there'll be a replay of this and you can listen to your heart's content later, especially if you can't sleep. Put our webinar on and it will help with any insomnia. Promise.
White noise. It's white noise, our webinar. It's perfect. Jeff, thank you. And there is a method to my madness here when we get down to covering insurance, when we get Kevin and more involved. But Jeff, I really do appreciate that. Let's move on to the cybersecurity, the gist of our discussion today and the understanding the risk of cyber insurance. But Sean, before I turn it over to you a little bit, Julie, can you post poll question number 2? Has your association considered its exposure to a cybersecurity incident? And while you're answering, Sean, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to have Julie post the results, and then we're just going to get into question number 1, which is, well, here, let's see the results quickly. Has your association considered exposure to a cybersecurity incident? So 1/3, basically 1/3 of our group has considered that. So I bet that grows after our webinar today, based on what Sean's going to tell us our exposure is and how simple it is to be hacked, if you will. But okay, so about 1/3 people, Sean, have given this some formal consideration. So let's jump in. I know Kinetics audits associations to assess their cyber risk. Can you take us through what you look for or look at when you're completing your audit?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the most part, an audit is going to be a logistical look at what your organization does. And when we talk about logistics, we're talking about what do you have, what are you responsible for, what is the value of each of those components. And when we talk about value in terms of cybersecurity, threat actors look at your organization and the different pieces that you have from an IT operations and cybersecurity aspect with different values. If I can get a just a general user, if I can get their username and password, that's not as valuable as getting the administrative assistant to a president or something like that, or even the president's credentials. So each one of those has its own value. And when we come in and we audit, we look at that from that standpoint. And each of those items, instead of us looking at it from a standpoint of value, like a threat actor does, we look at it from a standpoint of risk and exposure. Is something that you have in your environment a risk? Well, a risk and an exposure are a little different. So when we see a risk, we then calculate if it's actually an exposure. How likely is that to happen to you? And then from there, we total all of that up and show you where you have gaps, areas of, for improvement, or just things that are missing. And then we can outline a strategic plan, which also includes those logistical steps. In other words, do you have something in your environment that can protect against the risk? Yes. Is it configured to its best effort? If it's not, then we look to fix that. If you don't have that tool or that product that would protect against it, then we would look to make a suggestion as to something that would correct those. And that's basically what an audit is. It's that top-down look in your environment to understand where you sit in the threat landscape and how likely those threats are to how likely you are to actually be exposed to those threats. And hopefully that wasn't too technical of an explanation.
No, I do notice you talk with there's a whole set of language on the cybersecurity side that we're learning over the last couple of days here. So threat actor is a new one I haven't heard. So that's interesting. But okay, well, I know you, maybe not you, but your team is in Castle's facilities in terms of the properties that we manage. So amenity packages in communities, in condominium associations. Can you kind of outline for us what the 3 risk areas that you see constantly being violated in our spaces?
So the 3 biggest risk areas that we see, and it's not just in your environment, it is across the board, is identity. And when we talk about identity, it's not just usernames and passwords, it's device identity, it's an application that runs or has access to your information. Think about your phone. When you have an application on your phone that connects into your banking information, that has its own identity when it connects back as you. This can happen in any environment, whether it's Microsoft 365, whether it's Google's cloud platform or their Office platform. Each thing has a different type of identity, whether it's an application, you, or your PC or Mac or whatever it is. Each one of those connects in and is identified by what it is. When we see breaches, especially when it comes to financial fraud or social engineering attacks like phishing, it's always one of those 3 components that's attacked. And that tends to be the most common vector to get in. Probably the second one is an insecure endpoint. Again, this goes back to identity. If I, as an attacker, a threat actor, a bad guy, whatever you want to call me, if I can compromise your machine, your PC, your phone, I have access to more information. And then the third one is honestly misconfigurations, where something is in place, but it's not set up correctly, and it makes it easier for me as an attacker to go in with a few mouse clicks or a few commands, just kind of dump information or get access inside. So those tend to be our 3 greatest risk areas and the ones that we see over and over again, even at the Fortune 500 company level.
You mentioned, thank you, by the way. You mentioned social engineering as a risk, and I know that seems to be the buzzword these days in the industry. But can you, in layman's terms, describe what that is for us?
In the simplest terms, social engineering is a con. If we want to go back thousands of years, con artists were social engineers. They wanted to try and talk you into doing something, giving something up, or falling into their con. Well, now we've moved that into the digital realm. And the interesting thing between a con artist walking up to you and saying, hey, can you give me $5? And they say, oh, well, I really don't have a $5 bill. Can I swap that out for a 20? Kind of trying to get you to mess up and give them more money back than you actually should have. Now there's more trust placed in digital communication so that con is more effective. And what they're doing is using a social interaction as a form of con to get you to do something that might actually not be in your best interest. And to give some examples of that, if you get a message and it says, hi, I'm the CEO, I'm the president of the board here, and we're changing banks. And now I need to give you the new banking information. This is the new banking information. Please ignore the fact that it's in Zimbabwe. We've had some problems with the US banks. Go ahead and do this. That's a form of social engineering, and it's one that we actually see commonly in the financial industry, in real estate, mortgage and finance, and so on, as well as in construction and things like that, where the threat actor will come in and impersonate or misrepresent themselves as somebody of importance, a contractor, a member of the board, a member of the HOA or the association, in order to get you to give up that information or cut a check. We've actually seen that one where they say, hey, we need a cashier's check, make it out to this person. But that's not really who's cashing it on the other end.
And I think that's very fair. And I think I have a question later, more for you, Kevin, about we're seeing a lot of vendors being hacked and then reaching out to the association, and we'll get to that. So I know that's a question that's being chatted in, so we will get to that topic. Okay, so what can we do? Like, are we just sitting ducks, Sean? Is there anything we can? I know we can probably pay Kinetics, but what are the tools in our tool belt to help us manage this risk?
So one of the things, and I hear there's this interesting argument in cybersecurity, whether or not users have a responsibility or whether it's all on the cybersecurity team, IT operations, and really it's a combined effort. Users need to be aware of the dangers out there. However, we as cybersecurity practitioners, IT operations specialists, we need to be better about making users aware of these without boring them into a coma. If you look at most of your cybersecurity training or your phishing efforts, they're the kind of thing that you're going to do, you're going to get through it, and you're going to forget about it 5 minutes after it's done. So instead, we need to find a better way to engage users in understanding why something might not look right. And before I mentioned that there's a greater trust in something you receive in an email than there is if somebody walks up and asks you. If I walked up and I had a shirt on that had IRS spelled incorrectly, let's say it says RSI, and I say, hey, I need 50 gift cards or, to pay your back taxes, and I'm standing there in front of you, you're probably going to tell me to go get bent. If it comes in an email and there's misspellings or grammatical errors, people are still more willing to believe that that's legitimate because it came through in a digital format than they are if a person asks them that. Now, there are some changes now with voice cloning and things like that, where we're seeing more phone calls that are coming in and they're disguised as a voice, somebody you know. My own mother received a voice clone of me before she passed, claiming I was in jail in Texas. Now, my mother knew enough to know I didn't live in Texas, so she hung up and called me.
You were in jail in North Carolina. That was the problem.
Yeah, I was in Florida, but that's a different. But I mean, this does happen, and it continues to happen, and we're seeing it targeted more at businesses as opposed to individuals. Senior citizens or older people were a target because they weren't as technically familiar with things. Well, now in the digital world, where your CEO, your CFO, people are more online. There's better samples of their voice. There's better samples of their faces. They're starting to use these in their, a quote unquote, and I hate to use this term, but we have to be realistic. They're using generative AI to build these clones of people in order to make it look real in order to get the money that they want. So it's educating people on this. It's finding the right balance between the tools that protect and still allow people to do their work. And it's, like I said, it's that combined arms thought process. If users don't understand, they don't understand the dangers, the risks, and the exposures, you haven't given them enough information to enable them to do their job safely. And at the same time, we as cybersecurity practitioners have to put the right tools in place. So there's a lot that we can do. It's finding that right balance.
Well, it's interesting, and I do appreciate that. I think you made a good point, which is something we focus on at Castle, is if it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't right. Like, stop. And it is an awareness issue to a large extent. And part of this process is making people aware that these are the risks. These whole impersonation, I think, is what you termed it yesterday, of, I'm the new vendor, send me a check, I got to make payroll tomorrow, can you quickly do this? And it can be made to look very real. Like, if you're impersonating the president of the association or your vendor and you're writing to the president of the association, or the president of the association is writing to the treasurer, please give this information to the new vendor. If you don't have an awareness that this is not the way you conduct business, I think you certainly have a lot of exposure. Is that a fair comment?
It is, and you highlighted something there. One of the big hallmarks of a social engineering attack is a sense of urgency. Most of your cyber attackers are not going to try the long game. Now, that's not to say there aren't a few out there who will, but because of how easy it is to pick up on something when something is out of pattern over an extended period of time, they want you to do it now. So they can get their money, they can transfer that money out of the corrupt account, which impedes recovery of the money and makes things take longer. So they want that immediacy. This needs to be done now. And it's some form of, I can't do it, I need you to do it for me, and it has to be now. And it builds that sense of urgency and that response.
We spend, there are a bunch of questions on Castle's position here, and I will say we have a robust cybersecurity risk management program. We do a lot of training of our team specifically on phishing attempts where we pretend to be a bad actor and reach out to them. And it's something we're doing on a regular basis. Same with penetration testing into our system. So if you want to talk more about Castle's program, I'm happy to do that offline, but there were a number of questions about what we specifically are doing in this area. So Sean, awareness is one, being, common sense is one. You do have some hardware tools and monitoring systems that you guys do. Can you kind of give us an outline? I know you can't give a specific cost, but how you frame your support to an association to help them manage cyber risk?
So the easiest way to describe it is kind of like going in and doing a home renovation project. So when we come in, the audit is the initial estimate, and that's going to be as accurate as it possibly can be with everything we see on the surface. Now, if we come in and we remove drywall because it's wet and it has to be replaced, and we find out that the supporting beams behind the wall are not where they're supposed to be, that's something extra we have to look into. But our goal is generally to come in and fill in the gaps that are identified in the audit. And the biggest piece I can say is that if you already have something that in place that does that, if we can align it, through best effort to do what it's supposed to do, then more than likely that's going to stay in place. If that tool is either insufficient or doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then you look at making sure that something is in place there. And that's going to be you're going to throw out another term. It's called IDTR. That's identity detection and threat response. And what that does, and we talked about identity. Let's say suddenly my account logs in from Malaysia at 3:00 in the morning Eastern time. That is an anomaly because I just logged in earlier and there's no way I could have gotten from Florida to Malaysia. That's considered impossible travel. So an IDTR looks at that and determines what actions happened after that. Is this a threat? Is this identity compromised? And it shuts it down. And there are a number of different vendors that provide that. Some are better than others. Some combine that system with other systems like endpoint detection and response, what a lot of people think of as anti-malware or antivirus. It's now gotten a new name, which is always fun. We in cybersecurity, we love our acronyms, we love our terms, and it's not cybersecurity if you haven't come up with another one. I like to go back and say social engineering, and I have people that will still say phishing, vishing, smishing, quishing. They want to add all these terms in, and I think it just creates extra confusion. But again, outside of that, so we look at what those tools are, and we try and identify what is going to best protect you against the exposures you have. And again, risk and exposure are kind of different. You may have a risk, but is that risk actually an exposure? Is somebody likely to come along and compromise it? There's the old joke that if you're spouting off in a bar, you're at risk of getting punched in the face. But how likely are you to get punched in the face? That's your exposure. And that determines what you're saying. So it's we look at things kind of from that perspective in order to understand what your actual exposure is and counter that in the most effective way. Effective, it tends to be cost effective, efficiencies, all of those things. Simple is oftentimes better. So we look at those, and those are the pieces that we put in place. So that's going to determine, as well as the number of users and the number of devices you have, that's going to determine, kind of the level of effort for each individual engagement. And we try and view each engagement based on the context of the organization, which is
Awesome.
hugely important and often missing in a lot of IT operations and cybersecurity conversations.
Sean, thank you. And I think for those listening who are interested, we will give you Sean's contact information at the end, so you can reach out to him directly if you want to talk about your association. I think, you know, some of the basic things from a layman's term, and Jeff and I are layman's in this particular regard. We talked about in associations that have guardhouses or front desks, and usually that resident information, right? The software that says who's in unit 1201 to call up because you have a guest, that is almost always outside the normal infrastructure of your management company or a network. And that is a good example of something that has, you'd have exposure to, and there's some tools that Sean's team can put in place to help you lock down that data, if you will. Is that accurate, Sean?
Yes.
Okay, well, you talked about exposure, and I appreciate that. So now, Kevin, you've been very patient, and we appreciate that because we know you're not a patient man. So thank you for standing by. But before we get to you, Julie, will you please just pose poll question number 3? Does your association carry a separate cyber insurance policy? And we will get to that answer. Kevin, again, thank you. Jeff outlined the requirement to cover insurance. Most associations have a real general package policy. We call it property liability, E&O, D&O, crime. Those are the basic standard coverage. Can you share, Kevin, with our audience the 2 types of losses that an association is exposed to and would want to insure for in the context of a cyber incident?
Sure. I mean, Sean, you did an excellent job of outlining the exposures. And you also did an excellent job why people ignore you. Because within like 3 or 4 minutes, people's eyes start glazing over and their resistance start to fill. And all of a sudden we get scared. And all of a sudden we turn you off because you're giving us information we don't want to hear. We don't want to hear this. We don't hear any of this stuff about it. Okay. And the problem is, and it's such a, we have a separate program for cyber, and we insure community associations and management companies. And it's amazing the claims that we see are everything you just talked about. The number one, this is the first thing we've seen, is the landscaper gets hacked. All right, the hacker sends out emails, say, guess what? Pay now to avoid late fees. Here's my new bank and routing number. And just what you just said happens. I mean, this is one of the first things we've seen out there. Now, as an insurance, what we're looking at from an exposure point of view is 2 things. Either a hacker, A, wants your identity. That means they want to steal your personal identifiable information. Or 2, they want your money. They have the reserve account, you have your operating account. They know you're there. And they also know you don't have a Sean. You don't have, you're just a volunteer sitting in there and saying, guess what? My job is responsible for $250,000 in reserve account that we have here, trying to figure out how much we need $500,000. So you're spending all that time where there's people out there saying, okay, I have one job, is to trick, Jeffrey over there into sending me that reserve account. Okay. And so what I do is use all kind of social engineering, keep sending him emails. Eventually, he's going to click on one of those emails, download it into the system, and it's like me walking into a bank as Jeffrey and taking the reserve account. I mean, I'm gonna walk in there, I'm impersonating Jeffrey, walking into a bank, and that's what happens. And the only thing you have going for you is an insurance policy, because you don't have a Sean. I mean, it's amazing right now that the community association out there have no idea how to protect themselves from somebody going after their funds. If I travel, and whenever I travel, and I travel across the country, and I put on LinkedIn and I'm going out, by the time I've gotten there, my controller here says, you didn't order gift cards, right? No, I didn't order gift cards. I mean, they do it all the time. All the time. Hey, guess what? I'm in there. You'll give some gift cards out. And historically, they were easy but now we are aware. Community associations are not aware. So we talked about 2 things we're concerned about: the data itself and the money. The best way to get money is through social engineering, and it happens. From a pure insurance point of view, and why you need a cyber policy is for one reason: because it changes rapidly. The exposures change. So when exposures change, you need an insurance policy that says, Guess what? We picked that up. The number one problem, we talk about social engineering, that is not something that has been insurable 5 years ago because it's a con. You can't buy insurance if you're conned out of money. If you're, if you're conned out of some money, conned out of your car or whatever it is, that's just too bad. But what happened is that it was millions of dollars. For example, you have a corporate CEO now move into a new company, say Apple. He puts in newspaper that he's the new CEO of Apple. Somebody will fictitiously say, guess what? Give me my new password, give my ID, give me all the information. They give it to that fake person, and give me my bonus that I'm getting. This is things that have been going on for a number of years. Now we at where our level's at. Our level, what's going to happen is somebody's going to come in, pretend to be, and guess what? And get lucky and get some money. It's something that you insure unless you have you need a full cyber policy in order to protect you from everything Sean just said.
Kevin, that's great. And I just want to post the results of that poll because I think it's interesting. It looks like about 25% of our associations represented on the call have a cyber policy. And I think when we're saving the cost for the end because I think you'll be surprised how reasonable it is and how you can really help the association. So let's take that down. Kevin, to summarize, we talked about a general policy that an association has, and it has some cyber coverage, correct? In a normal policy. You gave us a great example yesterday of something that was an event, a bad actor posing as accesses a president's email. Some situations that may be covered under the policy, the general policy. In some situations, you need a cyber policy. Do you recall that? And can you share that with our group?
Okay. When you have a general liability policy, okay, so you're talking about a liability policy. So most of your coverage you have in the package is a general liability, meaning the day comes where a threat actor gets in and all of a sudden they want to hold you responsible. They're saying, Jeffrey, you should have hired Sean. You didn't hire Sean, so I'm holding you responsible for it, okay? And so now there's a lawsuit. So most of your coverage you have in the package is kind of liability driven. Also, it covers in the event of a data breach. You have a data breach. Now you have like maybe 10 things you have to do. You have to go out there and get a call center. You have to go out there and notify all the people. So they give you some basic coverages in the package policy. Now, the next piece of it is a crime policy. The key thing right now, let's say you can't afford to get a cyber policy or you don't understand a cyber policy. The number one thing you should get is a crime policy. You talked about fidelity insurance. Fidelity is one thing, employee embezzlement, but there's also non-employee type crime, okay? Non-employee type crime is social engineering. That's non-employee type crime. That is somebody who actually has committed a crime. Your money has been stolen, but it's from an outside person, okay? Another situation you would have, and I don't know if Sean runs into it, is now you see because of AI, because of technology, these banks that, for community associations, you get people who breaks into your mailbox, takes all the checks out, whitewashes the checks, and they go and collect money off that way too. That is a big problem in a lot of the country also right there because of technology. But as an insurance professional, we never knew these exposures. So I get a phone call from a Jeffrey and says, guess what? This just happened. Do you cover that? I don't know. And so now we have to go back and do this research and find out, no, it's not covered because, you don't have X, Y, or Z. That's why you need a cyber policy. There are certain things covered under your package policy. There's certain things covered under your crime policy, but there's certain things only covered in the cyber policy. It's social engineering right now. Everybody was listening. Write down the word. Do you have social engineering coverage under your policy? Okay. Everybody should write that down. If you do not have it, got to find it. There's nothing more important than that coverage right now. Nothing. Zero. That is where all the claims are at. That's what we're seeing, more so than the ransomware. Ransomware is probably number 2, but in our condo world, I don't think we're going to see it as much. But if you are a new building You have a lot of high-tech information. You got servers. If you have a server in your building, you need that kind of coverage. It has to be there. You got to have it. Yeah.
And I think, thank you, thanks a lot, Kevin. I think the beauty of this is the cost. And can you share with us what a typical policy would cost an association?
Okay, let's start with social engineering coverage. Social engineering can be put on your crime policy. You got to ask for it though. Nobody's going to give it to you. And some people don't understand it. That can cost $50 to $100 just to add that on your policy.
$50 to $100 a year for those
Yeah, that
folks who are
add that
listening
to the
here.
policy. Yeah, yeah. But you got to ask for it. And again, the problem is there's not enough insurance professionals who understand cyber enough to do it. They understand it today, but a lot of them don't. And a lot of them will sell you a crime policy and say, well, guess what? It's not covered. Nobody provides coverage for it because it's a con. You can't have coverage for a con, but you have to have it. So that's the number one, and that costs a couple $100. You can get a cyber policy for a community association, which is about $400 or $500. They give you just some basic coverages enough that responds to your cyber exposures. Sean talked about what is the exposure? Well, we examined a cyber exposure and said, this is what you worry about. You're not worried about loss of income, because you don't have a lot of income. So you don't worry about a lot of different things that a cyber policy would have that you don't care about. But even if you buy a full cyber policy, because you have no revenues, it's about $1,000. So it's not the cost that's the problem. The problem is it's not enough people out there saying you should have one, and these are the reasons why. Sean gave you all the reasons in the world to have one, because if you don't have Sean, what happens? All those things just came up. You can't call Sean up now and say, Sean, guess what? All these things happened to me. I can't believe you gave money to the landscaper. And now you call Sean up. Sean said, effective from day on, I can make sure it doesn't happen again. But now you added your reserve account, you added some operating account, you added money. So if you can't pick up the phone and call the Sean up and hire Sean, then the only other option is by having a cyber policy.
Yeah, and we would advocate for both, right? Like you're trying to do everything you can to mitigate the risk, and if something happens, you have insurance to fall back on. That's kind of our double-edged sword here in terms of program we're looking for.
Let me
Kevin,
give you one reason why that's important. Because Sean knows exposures before I do as an insurance person. So all of a sudden, and social engineering is a perfect example. Sean knew social engineering was happening 10 years ago. Okay, however long ago he knew about it, but there was no coverage at all 10 years ago. It was excluded. Nobody's doing it today. Maybe 20% of the carriers are doing it. Okay, rest of them are not. So if you need a Sean for one reason, everything's not covered by insurance.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If I can, I'd like to just add
Sean, go
something
ahead.
here. A lot, one of the things that Kevin is
Please.
talking about is recovery of your reserve. And that's a big deal because that's what they want to do. They want to get your operating account. They want to get your reserve. One of the other things that insurance helps offset is the cost of the investigation into the incident. Incident response is expensive. Mostly it's expensive because incident responders also need to be certified, at a certain level. They have to have tools that maintain custody, chain of custody, that can pull in things that we call telemetry evidence. All of that has to go into that investigation. And even a simple investigation can run into the tens of thousands of dollars on top of the loss of operating funds and that reserve. So insurance is a huge piece to help offset that cost because you are going to have to pay that whether you have insurance or not.
Yeah, let me add.
I'm jumping real quick because I am aware of some client issues where cybersecurity did become a big issue and social security numbers and all that personal information got out into the quote unquote dark web. And then owners were reached out to by the bad actor just to prove their point, et cetera, and so forth. And before you know it, complying with all the different types of legislation out there, you're looking at easily $250,000 in unexpected expenses dealing with the actual cybersecurity break-in, depending upon the level. And it could be a whole lot more expensive than that if you have to provide individual notice rather than like a bulk notice. to the world, if you will, about the break-ins, all these different requirements that if you're uninitiated in this with this problem, it is so worthwhile to discuss it with your insurance agent because for a few dollars every year, you can be covered. And boy, if you get hit unexpectedly and there is, God forbid, the type of information out there, you don't want to find that out after the fact.
Yeah,
I think. Go ahead, Kevin.
going back and talking about what Sean is saying in terms of the investigation part of it. I mean, just look, if you live in a 100-unit condominium and you find out that, guess what? And this is what happens in a condominium. Guess what? I filed my tax return, and guess what? Somebody got there before me and took all this money. Then, Craig, Sean, all of us found out, guess what? We were hacked in our association. Oh, I can't believe it. First thing we're going to do is blame the manager. And the manager, nope, wasn't us because we're good. We're fine. We're going to we'll blame everybody. But then once that settles down, an investigator comes in and trying to find out what happened. And you know how many people are in there? You haven't changed passwords for 20 years. First thing you find out that no passwords have ever been changed. And so, I lived there 20 years ago. I still have access to it. I moved out and all. My kids have access to it. And then you find out all the people who have 100 units. You have 2 people in each unit. People who lived there in the past. You have people who came in and left their driver's license. I mean, just the basic, just think about the basics and how much money it costs just to notify everybody. Whoever been there before in terms of, guess what? There's been a hack going on because of something simple as that. And that's the most simplest thing it is to get access to your social security number, your name in your building and find out, and people start filing tax returns left and right. I mean, that's probably the number one thing that's happening out there right now. I mean, it happened to me. I get an email from my accountant that says, guess what? Somebody got access to my information and you got to file now, paper file. I said, I got to send paper files to the IRS every single year because my information got out there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Sean, getting back to the insurance, what would the normal limits be on a cyber policy? Sean, I'm sorry, Kevin.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry,
again,
Sean.
I would say for a community association, okay, you're talking about a small limit. I would say if you have a $100,000, $250,000 limit, it's plenty. Most of them are $1 million across the board. You get
Right.
$1 million across the board, everything. That includes liability, that includes all that social engineering. But really, in a community association, you know what? If you want to save money, get one that has $250,000, $500,000, because you don't have that. Well, if you have a reserve account that's pretty high, you want to make sure it covers that at reserve account. I would base, there's a formula for fidelity insurance to know how much crime you should have, which is 3 months assessments plus your reserve. That's kind of how much, that's the standard. So if you're looking at how much money you have out there, make sure you have a policy at least, more than that. And I would start there. And that should be enough.
That's great advice. And guys, we advocate for somewhere between 1 and 3 months of operating cash. That's what you should have as an association. It's kind of a standard in our industry. So I think, Kevin, you just hit it. Like if you insure that amount on your fidelity coverage plus your reserves, that's your cash. That's your cash exposure. Do the policies are there typically no oh my gosh, what is it? You got to pay the first $1,000. What is the
deductible?
The deductibles are pretty small, but and another thing too, it's you got to make sure it covers everybody who's associated with it. Okay, so in other words, if I'm again, I'm the president of my association, right? And I just was hacked. I call my insurance company. My insurance company calls up Sean. Okay, and Sean to figure out what's going on, and the policy can't be limited just to people who handles that money. I mean, the board of directors. You got to go out to third parties. You got to go. It has to be really a broad contract so that if my son ends up accidentally going through my files and finds out that he downloaded everybody's personal identifiable information and indirectly sent it out to a lot of people because he just didn't know any better. It's an accident, and then a lot of stuff happens by accident. It's still a cyber situation, and now he has to come in and do the same work even though it was an accident. So it is just to make life easier. And because you don't have a Sean, and you don't even listen to Sean. At the end of the day, I mean, Sean just scares everybody. You have an insurance policy, the loss comes in, let the insurance person call up Sean and say, Sean, guess what happened? And then Sean can do his job. But I'm being funny and everything like that. But the reality is that And Sean, you said something really. Your job is to communicate better with people in there, so they don't get scared. And it's not boring. You just scare everybody. It's like, because nobody wants to hear that. Wow, I can lose. My when I say, look, my job, if I'm a criminal, my job is to be able to walk in the bank, pretend to be Sean, to be Craig, to be Jeffrey, to walk in the bank and to look like you guys enough to say, sure, here's all your money. Thanks for being a loyal member of our bank for 50 years. That's all. That's what I want to do. As if I'm the criminal, I want that more than I want anything else. You're operating a reserve account, and you got to have insurance for that.
Well, I think we've always advocated, Jeff, on all of our webinars that you've got your management company as a key partner, you have your attorney as a key partner, you've got your engineer as a key partner, and you have your insurance agent as a key partner. And if nothing else, if you don't take anything else from this today, you should be having a dialogue with your insurer to understand to understand the risk. The coverage is inexpensive. We've seen it between $600 and $1,500 a year for this coverage, and it's almost criminal not to have it at this point in time. The last thing, and I'm going to throw a little bit a curveball at you, Sean. We didn't talk about kind of a playbook, a response playbook. Can you kind of, if you found yourself in a situation where money's been stolen, you fell for a cyber incident, a phishing incident, can you what is the playbook for what you should do as an association?
One of the first things is to make sure that you have, so what we call breach counsel. You want to contact your insurance company. Insurance company is going to involve a breach counsel. Once the breach counsel is involved, that breach counsel, all the information transmitted about the incident becomes protected, which is important. It's reputational protection. It also protects from any leakage because threat actors actually watch organizations that they've attacked and gotten into to see if they've been caught. So it's important to communicate what's going on in a method outside of how you suspected that the attacker got in. And I know that may sound a little confusing, but let's say it was via email. This person emailed you. If it's through a text message, then you know that your phone number is what was the avenue of entry. That was your compromise point. So you want to communicate to people outside of those items. If it's a phone number or a phone, you want to make sure that you lock down that phone number, that you don't use it to communicate to anybody else. If it's a user account, you want to make sure you lock the user account. You want to contact the bank. What you don't want to do is delete anything, remove any information that's pertinent to it. You want to maintain that because that's going to be important not only for the insurance company, but also for that investigation. Because the big thing about the investigation is understanding what happened. And then, of course, there's the remediation side. How do we prevent it moving forward? In some cases, you can reach out to your cybersecurity provider, your managed service provider, and they may have an incident response partner that they bring in. In other cases, the insurance company may say, no, we need to use somebody who's certified under us. But even if that's the case, you can still have somebody from your cybersecurity organization act as an advocate and also help with what we call the initial triage and response. That's, I'm going to get in, I'm going to make sure that the attacker is still not in your environment, that they're not siphoning off any additional money, that they're not creating an additional risk to you. And I'm also going to work to preserve evidence. That evidence is, of course, very important to the insurance company, very important to the incident responder, but it's also important to protect you as the organization. So the first thing, of course, is it's basically lighting up the phone tree. You want to make sure everybody inside the organization is aware, that your insurance company is aware, that if you have a cybersecurity partner, that they're aware so they can begin that initial investigation and securing your environment.
I think that's great guidance. And Kevin, just a quick question on the insurance. The investigation is normally part of the coverage in a cyber policy?
Oh yeah, that's the key coverage.
Big key.
Because a lot of times you may not have a claim. You may think
Right.
that, wait a minute, I left my laptop open. I don't know if somebody got access, or my laptop was stolen. I don't know if it's a loss or not. So we call Sean up, and Sean has to go and do the investigation. So that is a loss under the policy. Just say my laptop was stolen. I don't know if it's protected, not protected. I don't know what's going on, but I'm worried because I know there was personal identifiable information on that laptop. So once you know that by law, you got to report it.
So, just ask the VA.
Yep.
Okay. Jeff, did I miss any? I got to ask all the questions. Did I miss anything? Or are we ready
We
to
don't have
kind of
enough
wind
time
up
for
and
that on
thank our
today's
guests?
webinar. We don't have enough time to cover what we missed, but I think you did a great job with an introduction to the subject, its importance to the associations. You've introduced some wonderful experts, giving everybody a bird's eye view of the potential problems. And I think our conscience can be clean for everybody who's watched the webinar today. If God forbid you have a problem, well, you knew what to do.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that, gentlemen. Thank you. In fact, I've seen a couple of chats in. I've had the insurance agent on the call while I'm on your webinar, making sure we have social engineering coverage in our condo package and how much is cyber policy. So, Sean and
Good.
Kevin, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Greg, what if somebody
as
wants to
promised,
watch this again?
And I do
Yeah.
have one additional thing. We didn't cover
Yes.
it. Kinetics, cybersecurity audits, those risk audits,
Yes.
those are provided at no charge. So
Cool.
we really do
Perfect.
come in and take a look at what you have. Of course, we always hope that you'll use us for the remediation, but it is a service that we provide at no charge for the audit.
Fantastic.
Nice.
And you should be able to see, listeners, on your screen the contact information for all of us. This webinar will be posted on www.castlegroup.com under resources. Thank you for listening in and representing your association. Jeff, always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Kevin and Sean, I hope we will see you in the trenches. So
Absolutely.
have
All
a
right.
great afternoon, everybody.